Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. This is the Paradise Garden, which I started a few years ago, and I started out using a grass as a matrix plant. That's a plant that is common to all four beds through which I could weave flowers, and this was Stipa tenuissima. Well, that was the idea. It didn't quite work out because Stipa tenuissima thrives in poor soil and really good drainage, and I can't give either, even though we did actually add a lot of grit. So after a couple of years, most of them have died, and those that have survived are very unhappy. So they are going to the compost heap, which is fine because I grew them all from one packet of seed. So on the principle of right plant, right place, I'm giving up with Stipa tenuissima, and I'm going to try something else, which I can gather for free in other parts of the garden. On today's programme, Adverley looks at the extraordinary history of the quest to attain an immaculate lawn.
It's a two-person mower, pulled from the front and guided from the back.
We go to Nottingham to meet a gardener who has created a secluded haven on the oldest allotment site in Europe.
It's right in the heart of the city centre, and it's like this big green oasis, like a huge secret garden with lots of avenues and paths.
And I should be planting spuds. For many years, oriental poppies with their wonderful, great, voluptuous flowers were one of the features of the late May and early June borders here in the Jewel Garden. But over the last few years, they've diminished, performed really badly, and last year they didn't appear at all. They just simply died away. And I thought that was something to do with here at Longmeadow and was our problem. But actually, it turns out that lots of people have had problems with their oriental poppies, gardeners and growers alike. So if it's happened to you, don't take it personally. It's down to downy mildew. Now this is a fungus that attacks the poppy and is made much worse by our cool, wet summers. So if yours have died back, don't take it personally. However, I'm going to have another go. I'm going to replant some, and I've got to start with Beauty of Livermere, probably the most famous oriental poppy of the lot. And from mid-May through to early June, it is the most resplendent thing in the whole of the garden. But this time, I'm going to start by giving them a really good position to fight the mildew. So with the box hedges out, I've now got space on the edge of the border, exposed to the wind and the light that will be perfect. Now, as well as positioning them where they're exposed to plenty of ventilation, I'm also going to add some grit into the hole. Poppies will grow in almost any kind of soil, sand, chalk, as long as it's well drained. Lightly work that in, and what it means is the roots won't sit in water. Now this is a small plant now, but it will grow a fairly decent size. You'll get a clump which will be about 2 foot across and will fill this corner. So we'll put that like that and then just gently pull the soil around it. Firm it in. The Jewel Garden is essentially symmetrical, so I'm going to put another Beauty of Livermere on this corner so that we do get that symmetry and balance. Firm that in well. Just because it likes really good drainage is not a good reason to underwater it. So I'm going to water these in well till they get more established and their roots can get out into the soil. These should bulk up over the next year or two until we get really substantial plants. That is if the downy mildew doesn't strike again. So we'll watch and hope. Now, the Jewel Garden is a long way away from any idea of a lawn, but I know that millions of gardeners have lawns and love their lawns and take great pride in them. But the lawn as a key feature in every garden is a surprisingly recent development, as Adderley found out.
Lawns are so integral and enshrined in most of our gardens. They feel like they've been here forever, smooth, rolled and often fastidiously adored.
But actually, lawns have a noisy and bumpy history full of camels and invention.
Yes, I did say camels.
And for decades, only the very wealthy could afford them.
One of the first mentions of the word lawn came in the 1500s and described a glade or open space in a forest or between woods. But big lawns came into their own in the 1700s with the landscape movement. Designers like Capability Brown redesigned entire estates, creating rolling pastures with artfully placed groups of trees, rerouted streams, new lakes and bridges, and immense views.
What owners wanted, like here at Cotsbrook Hall, were lawns that swept all the way to the doorstep. But there were issues.
The easiest way to get neat, close-cropped grass was with living lawnmowers like sheep, who could nibble acres at a time and look picturesque while they were at it. But how to stop them walking into the living room? The answer was a deep ditch known as a ha-ha.
It was called a ha-ha because it was invisible from the house, and visitors only discovered how it worked when they got here and went, ha-ha!
So who cut the rest of the grass? Scythesmen. They would start at dawn as the dew lubricates the blade, ensuring a better cut, and scythes need sharpening several times an hour.
It was incredibly hard work, and women had to get up early too and follow behind, picking up the grass.
Grass this length would more likely have been cut for hay, but baskets really came into their own on the short front lawns. Only higher paid, top of their game scythesmen could cut lawns so precisely, shaving off millimetres in the process. And women would sweep up the tiny pieces with brooms to fill the baskets. This is a modern Austrian scythe, apparently easier to use than an English one. And though the whole process is mesmeric to watch, it is very slow.
But in the 1820s, a chap called Edwin Beard Budding, who built machines for the woolen trade, had an idea.
Shearing machines were designed to nip the bobbly bits of the newly woven cloth, using several blades set on a roller. Presumably, Budding saw this and thought it might be useful elsewhere. This is a replica of what he built, the first ever lawnmower.
It's a two-person mower, pulled from the front and guided from the back.
The story goes that Budding tested out his new invention at home at night, presumably to keep it secret from competitors, but...
The cast iron machine was so noisy, the neighbours complained.
Budding got the patent for it in 1830, and with it came the very beginnings of lawn envy and a measure of your morality. The shorter, flatter and smarter the grass around your home, the higher your standards. Lawns had arrived. It didn't take long for the person pulling the mower to be replaced by horsepower.
And the pony or donkey wore these cute little boots so they didn't leave marks in the lawn.
There were boots for the front and boots for the back, which could be made to order by drawing round hooves in advance. Boot-wearing ponies appeared rolling lawns for Wimbledon matches. And London Zoo got round the hoofprint issue altogether by using a camel to pull the mower, as they have flat padded feet. But of course the Victorians didn't stop there. Smaller, nippier mowers were created for smaller, fiddly areas. It meant that wealthy Victorians, like here at Brodsworth Hall, could create small island beds to show off prized exotic plants and elaborate bedding schemes. The mown grass in between sets off the plants and guides the eye through the colour-filled garden. Beds could be any shape or size because the Victorians made machines to handle them.
This is an edger from the 1880s. Isn't it fabulous?
Some Victorians declared the new trend a disease of the eye due to its garishness, but that didn't stop the tide of new colour or technology. This is one of the first sprinkler systems still working a treat. Lawns and their beds were established and blooming in our beloved gardens.
The next step was for lawns to arrive into small urban gardens, and that was a stripe and several mowers away.
I remember researching the history of lawnmowers and lawns, and it's absolutely fascinating, with twists and turns that you would never expect. Now here at Longmeadow, we've reduced our mowing to a minimum. We've got rid of all our lawns, we have long grass wherever we can, and we mow paths, either through the long grass planted up with bulbs and wildflowers, or between borders. And I would say that even if you love your lawn, and the stripes give you a lot of satisfaction, do try and have some long grass too, because it is so good for wildlife. And this actually connects us to our first visit this week to one of your gardens, because we're going down to Dorset to visit a garden where everything possible is done to encourage the wildlife.
Hi, my name's Laura and this is Riley, and welcome to our garden here in Poole. We live in a very, very urban area, and everything we do here, we do for wildlife. So in this garden we do have some foxes living. We get badgers visiting every single night. We have bats foraging, and we get around 20 different species of bird visiting the garden. So it is a very, very wildlife friendly garden. But the one thing that I want to talk to you about today are slowworms. Slowworms are a legless lizard, and they are a gardener's best friend. So you do want slowworms in your garden, and that's mainly because They will eat slugs and snails, so keep your lettuces nice and clear. So how to encourage the worms into your garden? One thing to do is to create compost heaps and compost bins. So slow worms, they are reptiles. They can't make their own heat like us mammals do. They have to rely on heat from their environment. So as the leaves decompose, they give off heat, and that creates a nice warm environment for the slow worms to be able to live in. Do be very careful when you are mowing your grass. So they do like to live in long grass. As I'm sure everyone checks for hedgehogs, check for slow worms. So make sure they're nice and safe and they don't get caught in any accidents.
Well, Laura's lucky to have slow worms at all, because in this garden, although we do everything we can to encourage wildlife, they've become very rare. I suppose I see a slow worm here every 5 years at most, whereas grass snakes we see practically daily in the summer. So whatever wildlife you do have, treasure it. Now, it's time to sow some nasturtiums. Nasturtiums are a plant that I think are a little bit undervalued, because you can get them in the most extraordinary rich colours. And I've got 3 varieties here that I've chosen for the dual garden, and I will use them to underplant the big pots. And the first one is called Black Velvet, which is the deepest burgundy that you could possibly imagine. And then we go to the other extreme of red, bright crimson with Empress of India. And finally, a really good marmalade-y orange, although the name's a bit of a mouthful. It's Tip Top Alaska Deep Orange. But whatever colours you choose, the way to plant them is exactly the same. One was always told that the secret of growing nasturtiums was to use the sweepings from the potting shed floor. The principle and the moral of the story is that they do like poor soil, because if you give them rich growing conditions, you're going to get a lot of growth, a lot of foliage, and far fewer flowers. But to start them off, I'm using my seed compost, and I'm going to put them in plugs, because the seeds are actually quite big and easy to handle. But you can grow them in pots or in seed trays, whatever is convenient for you. Just pop them in the centre of the plug like that, and then I'll push them in later. Of course, nasturtiums, as well as looking really good, taste good too. They're good to eat, and they make any salad look lovely with some nasturtium flowers added to it. So that can go there, and then on the other half I've got deep orange, which of course is a perfect late summer dual garden colour. Because the seeds are nice and big and they're really no trouble to grow, I think these are a very good plant to get children interested in growing things, and also the fact you can eat the flowers is good fun. So if you've got children who might be interested in gardening, try starting them on nasturtiums. And then I just press these in, I'll cover them lightly, water them, and put them somewhere warm to germinate. It doesn't have to be a heated mat, but a windowsill is good. A porch, if you've got a greenhouse, obviously that's ideal. And I expect to be planting these out round about the end of May, beginning of June. Now we have another chance to see a visit that Adam made to Shumers Square in South London, which has a range of tiny but jewel-like front gardens, which put together makes something truly resplendent.
Welcome to a hidden horticultural gem in the heart of Peckham. As you walk down the path, you are flanked by these gorgeous miniature gardens that are full of character and variety. Looking around here, it's clear to see that there's a real community spirit in this secluded neighbourhood, bonded by the power of gardening. Sally Cowling is one of the residents here. This is an incredible street. Give me an idea when it first started?
Well, I gather it was before my time, but I gather it was about 1984, and one of the residents was a civil engineer, and his wife was a really keen gardener, and he laid the pathway along here, and she started the real sort of push to beautify the little plots.
I mean, I know all the gardens are small, but tell me what the biggest one is against the smallest one.
Well, there is an enormous garden, clearly, which you will have noticed, which I think maybe is like 3 metres by 2, which we think of as landed gentry in this neck of the woods. And then the smallest, I think, are probably the ones for the middle houses like mine.
But you've done well, though, haven't you? You've got, what, 1 metre by 3?
Something along those lines. Yeah.
I mean, even in your little space, you've got clematis hidden behind the plum tree up there. It sort of gives me the sense of like a scene from Romeo and Juliet. Clematis montana, you wouldn't think of putting that in a small space.
No. But actually it is beautiful because it's gone all over the top of the plum tree.
As you work along, each space has got this individual feeling to it. I've walked past spaces that feel architectural. You've got gardens that feel woodland in their setting. People don't stop at their boundaries either. They're out onto the path. Well, look in here. You know, I go into this garden and I think it feels a little bit as if the coast has met the cottage garden. The sleepers out the front, they give it that coastal feel. And the moment I sit down, my eyes engage with the plants in a completely different way. Above my head, I've got this rose and it smells fantastic, which makes it feel quite romantic. Start to look at the planting. We've got the herbs, we've got wallflowers, and they're good, hard-working plants. You could disappear from this garden for a couple of weeks, come back, and everything will be fine. But what I love about this street more than anything is collectively these gardens make an incredible wildlife corridor. You know, this is a really simple collection of plants, but it demonstrates an awful lot about small space. First of all, you look, that's an oak, and it's over 20 years old, grown in a pot. If you can grow an oak in a pot, surely you can grow anything. And then you look closer at the Cotinus. Well, if I pick a book up, it'll tell me that this thing will get to 8-9 foot by 8-9 foot, you know. But you can grow it in a small space in 2 ways, you know. If container-wise, if it gets pot-bound, we just pot it on. But also, we can cut this one hard back to the ground so we can store it. Then moving across, we've got the texture of the fern and the tiny little leaf with the viola. So if you start putting plants together very foliage-driven, you know, and forget about the flowers a little bit, I know that's a little bit difficult, but you'll end up with a lot more interest right throughout the year. You know, for me as a designer, even in the tiniest of spaces, if I can, I will work water into the garden. I think this feature works really well. Simple, nice big deep pot so that water will stay cool underneath. There's even fish swimming around in there. Irises popping up, plus you've got the flower, and it's a lovely level for me to look at. Then I'll stop and listen, and I've got the sound of water as well. So what they've done, which is quite clever, if I move back round to the door, which would be my main focal point, there's another feature just sat on that wall, and that sound really pulls me towards it. You know, I think this little street proves that you don't need a big space to have a lovely little garden. They've got charm, they've got personality, and for me that's what gardens should be about. But it does make you stop and wonder, with gardens getting smaller in this country and the amount of houses that we're building, this possibly could be a fantastic template going forward.
Certainly all those front gardens are a true inspiration. And later on in the year, we will be devoting a whole programme to gardens that manage to make the most out of every inch of their space. And please do send us films of your gardens to share with the rest of us. Now, here in the writing garden, I'm planting a white umbellifer called Olea grandiflora, which I've grown from seed, sown it last September. It's overwintered and now it's ready to plant out, and it will start growing and flowering later on in spring and into summer. But the spring display is just beginning to take off with the summer snowflake, Leucosium, and the daffodil Thalia that is ivory coloured then opens out white. We've even got the first tulips beginning to appear, which is very early for us here at Longmeadow. Now, still to come on today's programme. We visit the allotment of Katrina Harrison in Nottingham, who has created a productive and also very beautiful plot in the heart of the city. And we get an update from Kate Garraway, whose garden became a sanctuary during an incredibly difficult year for her family.
We wanted to think that we would be coming through a long, hard winter and bursting into some hope for the future.
But first we're going to visit one of our viewers in America, who shows that even when the winters are unbelievably harsh, there is a way that you can start your gardening year.
My name is Kendra, and I live in Maine, which is the northeasternmost state in the United States. Though I haven't been able to do a lot outside yet, I have been spending a ton of time in my grow room at home. I just built this year. I installed a bunch of shelves and about 8 LED lights, nothing special. And it's in this little room in the basement of our house. This, surprisingly, has just enough space for tons and tons of seedlings to grow. After successful germination, I very carefully place the seedling into a seed starting mix. And once the roots are strong enough, I can then take them to harden off and then put them into the ground or raised bed. Living where I do means much of the year is spent not in the dirt outside. So learning how to start seeds has opened up a whole new world for me of gardening, and it really has made it possible for me to garden almost year-round. That's been wonderful for my mental health, and hopefully it'll be good for our kitchen as well. It just goes to show you can garden anywhere, anytime.
Well, Kendra shows very clearly that where there's a will, there is a way. And it is full of hope for spring and summer to come. Now, a few weeks ago, I chitted some potatoes. You can see here that instead of the long, rather translucent shoots that you get with potatoes left in a dark place, because these have been put into light in a frost-free place and exposed to light and sun, the shoots are knobbly and short, and they are just waiting to explode into action once they go underground. And the reason for doing this is just to speed up the growth process, and particularly pertinent if you're growing new potatoes, which are usually first earlies but can be second earlies too, because by getting them off to a good start, sometimes you can harvest them before blight comes. Now, if you haven't got a lot of space, you can still grow really good potatoes, and I've found that these raised beds are ideal. And I plant them very simply. Just make a hole quite deep and pop them in. And on the spacing on a bed like this, I will put 3 across. So one in the middle there, and then we can plant them in a grid. I'm putting the strongest chit facing upwards. One of the reasons for planting them reasonably deeply is to protect them from frost. Potatoes are tender, and as long as the tubers don't get frosted, they will survive perfectly well. Now, with all potatoes, the closer you plant them together, the smaller the individual potatoes will be, and if you want maximum crop, you need to space them much wider than I am now. I would say almost 3 foot apart. But for new potatoes, maximum crop is not what it's about. It's about maximum taste. Because these are planted like this in a raised bed, I can't earth them up in the traditional way, where you draw the soil up in ridges over the emerging foliage. And the reason you do that is to protect them from frost. But these are still going to be susceptible to frost, so what I'll do is mulch them. And for that I could use straw, I could use compost, or even more soil, which I'll bring in and just pack round the leaves so that if we get a frost, only the tops will be nipped and they'll keep on growing. And the key to a really good crop of first or second earlies is speed. Now, I don't suppose there's a veg garden or allotment plot in the land that doesn't grow spuds in some form or other. But not all allotment sites are the same. Some are really special, and we're now going to visit one of the oldest and most beautiful of the lot. Katrina Harrison is lucky enough to have a plot in St Anne's Allotments in Nottingham.
As soon as I open the door to my allotment and I step through, I just feel like I'm in my own little garden world. Any of the outside worries or troubles, they just disappear. It's just me, the garden and the wildlife, and I'm just at peace here. I grew up in a small town and I spent quite a lot of time outdoors as a child, and later down the line I moved here to Nottingham into a city centre flat, and I didn't quite realise at the time how much I missed my outdoor space, and I felt very claustrophobic and cooped up, so I signed up to get my allotment. The allotment site here at St Anne's, that's the oldest and the largest allotment site in Western Europe. It's right in the heart of the city centre, and it's like this big green oasis, like a huge secret garden with lots of avenues and paths. All of the plots here are divided by hedgerow, and there are 34 miles of it. We each have our own little gate and entrance, and it makes it a really private space. It's almost like the garden's giving you a little hug. I think people of my generation are more interested in allotment gardening because for a lot of us, we don't have our own back gardens, we don't perhaps own a house. So this is a way for us to create a garden, to grow our own food. And there's just nothing better than eating your first ripe strawberry at the beginning of summer. The taste and the flavour just doesn't compare to anything you can buy in the shops, and it's just so good. I really had no sort of pre-knowledge about gardening or growing my own food. It was just a voyage of discovery for me, and I started to learn more and more as I gardened and as I transformed the space. It was such a huge learning curve, and it became quite an addiction. As I started to grow my own food and put my hands in the soil, it just really lit up something inside me, and I started to think more about what I wanted in life. And I was working in quite a busy, fast-paced job. It was quite stressful, and I started to think about horticulture as a career path because I got so much enjoyment from it. I like to share a lot of photos of my progress on the allotment, and it got to the attention of a head gardener on a private estate who actually got in touch with me to say that there was a position opening and that perhaps I should apply. So I applied for this job, I got it, and now I'm working my dream job, and it's just completely changed my career. I grow all of my potatoes in these large pots because I find it helps prevent wireworm, which I had in my soil, and it's time to harvest, so I'm going to tip them out and see what I've got inside. I'm really excited. It's like finding your buried treasure. So I've growing my squash this year, I'm trying a new technique. I'm growing it vertically for the first time. And I've had some great success because I found that the squash that I grow on the ground very quickly got mildew, which, you know, is inevitable at certain times of the year. But the ones that I'm growing vertically haven't yet got the mildew, and I think because they're elevated, they've got that airflow underneath, and it's helping keeping the mildew at bay. And they're romping away. I've got loads of squash on there ready to harvest. I guess my allotment is a bit like a blank canvas, but I didn't really have a design in mind. I found it's really been a way for me to channel my creativity, playing with colour, shape, pattern. It really sort of fills that little hole of creativity for me. I really love to upcycle. I accidentally broke my chimney this year and I was absolutely gutted because it was something that a friend gave me. So I've transformed it into a little planter. I've turned a lantern into a bird feeding table, and I just love giving things a new lease of life. I find my stepping stones really quite playful element to the garden, and they go around my apple tree. I pick them up secondhand, and they just give it a nice little fun sort of childlike element that's stepping through the little wildlife corner on a little voyage of discovery. These are the straw flowers that I grow for drying and making some home decorations with. It feels great to take something from the garden and extending its life, so it's not just a summer flower that blooms in the garden, but you can create something new with it, something new and exciting, and put your own creativity to it. I'm still here during the winter months, but obviously there's not so much colour, so by having a few crafty projects using flowers from my allotment in winter, it just reconnects me with what I've grown that year and, you know, reassociates myself with the garden. I think when you get your hands in the soil, you can feel the life in the soil, and then you start sowing your seeds and you start thinking about the future. There's sort of like a hope, and you're thinking about the harvest that you're going to have and you're going to share. And it just sort of lights something up inside you because you know that there's something really good that's going to come out of this.
I'm so glad that Katrina's story has worked out so well for her, and I'm so glad that she's managed to get a plot in that wonderful allotment site. Now, one of the simplest flowers in the garden at the moment is giving me one of the biggest pleasures, and that's these wood anemones. This is Anemone nemorosa, and you can see that it's just a little star-like white flower with this yellow centre. And we planted a few maybe 20 years ago, and gradually it spread. They open out in the light and then close up at night, and they're a good indicator, by the way, of ancient woodland. Because if there's a really wide expanse, you know they've been there for a long time, because it does spread quite slowly. And they like cool shade to a degree, but also some sunlight too. So the edge of a wood or underneath shrubs, but not deep in their shadow. So relatively tricky to get right, but when they're happy, they spread that happiness far and wide. Now it's time to visit another of your gardens, and we go to Milton Keynes, where a gardener has come up with an ingenious solution to a problem that I suspect that most of us have had to deal with at some time or other.
Hello, my name's Pamela Wardell, and my passion is flowers. Any shape, any size, any colour. And because I do all different sizes, quite often I have to stake them with canes. The problem was where to store the canes when they weren't in use. I've tried in the shed, I've tried in corners of the garden, the wind blows them over, they get wet, I put them in plastic buckets, they all go manky, but now I've found the ideal solution. It's fabulous. Look at these architectural beauties. 2 old chimney pots, bought online, canes, fabulous. Keeps the canes nice and straight, they don't fall over, the wind doesn't knock them. If the rain goes in, I've just raised them up an inch from the floor on just some stones so the rain comes straight out. And just look at them, so much nicer than a plant in the top where all the proportions are wrong because the plant's too small, the pot's too big. Ideal, and I love them.
It may seem a small thing, but Pamela's right. Bamboo canes that aren't stored properly are a real nuisance. They fall all over the place, and if you tie them up and you only want one, then you have to untie them. And actually, those chimney pots look a really good idea. Now, last week, I cut back these ferns. These are Dryopteris Felix Mass. And now I want to start the process of dividing them. These now have got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different crowns, or knuckles as I call them, which could make 6 different plants. In fact, I just want to divide them into 2, and I'm doing this for 2 reasons. On the one hand, when I planted them too close to the path, and I just want to put them a little bit further back. And on the other hand, in the process, by dividing them, I'm creating new plants, and I've got plans to plant them in 2 different areas of the garden. Having said that, although I divided ferns before from pots, I've never divided them as big as this, so I know how to do it, but there's an element of experiment about it. So I do know the first thing you have to do when you're dividing any fern, whether it's in a pot or in the ground, is dig it up. Don't try and chop it up whilst it's still in the ground. Right, this is how serious it's getting. This is the first day since last September that I've been able to garden just in shirt sleeves. Let's just embrace the sunshine. There we go. There she comes. Lots of soil, which I want to take off as much as possible. Now, ferns will grow in most soils, and Dryopteris is really adaptable. It will grow in full shade, it will grow in some sun, so it can grow practically anywhere. Right, that's the start. Now I'm going to put this on the path. And what you do is stick a fork where you get a join between 2 clumps, and put another one like that, stick that in like that, and then see if we can tease them apart. Nope, nothing happening. Absolutely nothing. And it's solid. So I can use a knife and cut through it. I think we're getting somewhere now. There we go. Now you can see that's quite a palaver. They're very substantial, and that's where I've had to cut through this very hard woody crown, so I would recommend having a really sturdy knife and then use the forks to tease the roots, whereas if you just slice through the roots you might damage them. But that will give me a very nice establishing plant, and the 2 places I want to plant them are at the back of the pond and also in the copse. So that's going to be moved to a new position, and this, which is still very substantial, is going to be replanted slightly further back, equidistant between the two trees here. Now, last year, Joe went to visit the journalist and presenter Kate Garraway, who, like so many people, has had a life-changing experience with COVID. When Joe went to meet Kate, her husband Derek had already been in hospital for 6 months. And during that difficult period, their garden was a source of great solace for Kate and her family.
So here you go.
Wow,
Steps
lovely
are
big garden for London. It's
really,
big.
we're so lucky. We are so lucky. We bought the house, Derek and I, for the garden. So we've been here 4 years, and I know you're probably thinking we haven't done much, but it was literally covered in brambles. Covered in those reeds. I don't quite know what they are, but you...
the flag iris.
It is flag iris. I've always called them flag iris, and everyone said they're not sure.
Well, yellow,
Okay.
big yellow.
They're big yellow flowers.
Flag iris.
So it was covered in that. But what we did have was all these incredible trees.
Yeah.
Apple trees, pear trees, greengage, everywhere. The first job really was just to clear everything and see what was there. And for the first year, we just watched to see what would come up.
Ah, that's exactly what you should do. I mean, we always say you should do that, but no one ever does it.
Everywhere roses came. It felt a little bit that first year like being in Sleeping Beauty, and we were the prince sort of hacking our way through the thorns, and emerged with all these incredible roses, and they were just everywhere, and it was so beautiful. But it's obviously been an odd year for the world, and probably, very directly, personally for me. So,
well, your world's been turned upside down.
Derek, who didn't have the symptoms of a cough and a temperature, suddenly at the end of March just said, I feel really unwell. And we had 24 hours of thinking, what is this, and calling doctors, and then eventually the doctor said, call an ambulance. So this was end of March. He got into the ambulance, went to hospital, was found to have COVID. And then suddenly it just went whoom. And it just took hold and swept through his body, touching every part of his body. And he was fighting to breathe. And then, one Sunday morning, they called me on the phone, on speakerphone, and said, we're going to have to put him into an induced coma. And he's just not woken up. I can remember the week before he got sick, he was saying, I think we're going to have a lockdown. I think the schools are going to close, and I think we need to think about it. So just before all the garden centres shut, Darcy's my daughter, she's 14 and Billy's 10, suddenly said, we should grow our own vegetables, Mum, because at least then we'll survive. And I said, great idea, let's do that. And I think for her, it was about something positive to do.
Yeah.
It was like, I can't help Mum, I can't help Dad, I know what's going on, sort of, but I also can't do anything about it. You feel so helpless. And it then meant together, we nurtured this. And so we've had cabbages, we've eaten radishes, we've had raspberries, we've had blackberries. This became like our saviour, really, because you ask a teenager, how do you feel about the fact Dad might die? Sorry, it's hard to even say it, isn't it? How do you feel about the fact Dad might die? And they'll just say, okay, they don't, it's too big.
Yeah.
It's too big a thing to take on. But when you're sitting there sort of like planting radishes, she would start asking me questions, and that allowed us to talk about it.
But it's also so positive.
It's doing something really positive, and I was so proud of her for that. And I could share things with her because I could see how much she wanted to know.
Turn the compost over in with the other soil.
It's an activity, and it's an activity that's about life. It was rather sad because the radishes came. They're one of Derek's favourite vegetables, and we ate them and he still wasn't better. So I then thought, we've got to go more long-term here. So we were planting things that were going to take longer to bear fruit, and I'd say, well, Dad will be better by then, and let's hope he'll be better by then. And of course now that it's been so long, we've now got a huge basket of bulbs, and I was like, right, let's plant these so that when Dad comes home, the place will be full of colour. When you're living day to day on a knife edge, doing something that gives you a future just helps a sense of progress, really, where there actually is none in the direct situation.
That's good, isn't it?
I'd often get a phone call at midnight saying we're not sure if he's going to make it through the night. And you can't sleep after that. Yeah. So I was helpless. So I come out into the garden at 1 o'clock in the morning and do random mad things like water his favourite plants. You know, it doesn't take a trained psychologist to know that by watering them and not letting them die, I sort of felt like I was doing something to keep the hope alive and to keep the spirit of him alive. And I feel like nature paid me back, because they then just grew the highest they've ever grown, and they flowered beautifully with wonderful yellow flowers. These are the reeds, the flag irises, that Derek loves, and even though I've cleared a lot from the lawn, I wanted to keep them here because they're the memories of the house as we first bought it. But after they've flowered, they are basically just sort of reeds, aren't they? So last year, when it was really wet in the autumn, I put in some allium bulbs, and everybody said they wouldn't survive because it's so clay and wet.
Yeah.
And they have been amazing, because they just kind of came up through just as the flag irises went. They were huge. I mean, the seed heads now are still beautiful, I think, but they were massive, big purple flowers with the lovely kind of pinky stems. And they just suddenly made it wonderful. And yeah, I feel like those alliums fought back to make the reeds work against everyone's advice, and I love that. It's been the most important space for us. It's been a place to find joy. It's been a place to find hope. It's been a place to go a bit crazy and feel a bit unleashed in a stifling physical and emotional time that we've all lived through. It just gives you that sense of positive moving forward that I think only a garden can do, really. You can't think short term in a garden. You have to plan. You have to have hope. You have to invest in a future. You don't plant something unless you believe it's going to come up. So by planting something and believing Derek will see it when it comes up, that gives us a sense of future.
I'm sad to say that over a year later, Derek remains in hospital. But the family garden is bursting with spring growth and continues to provide hope for better days ahead.
These are the bulbs I planted when you had that lovely visit back at the end of summer last year. They're up. Daffodils are doing well. Particularly love the ones round the tree here, along with the cyclamen. I thought I'd gone a bit too crazy, but actually next year I think I'm going to do more. They just look fantastic. And some of the daffodils here are up as well. And in the big pot with the camellia, I've never planted daffodils in ericaceous before, but they're loving it there. And they've done exactly what we wanted them to do. When we planted them, we wanted to think that we would be coming through a long, hard winter and bursting into some hope for the future. And we've now got another big bag of summer bulbs and seeds. So we're just planning the next stage, aren't we, Bill?
Yeah, we are.
He's cameraman as well as gardener. So we're going to get on with building the next stage of the future and planting for the summer.
I'm so glad that Kate's daffodils have bloomed so successfully. And there's no question that whatever the circumstances, flowers in spring bring joy with them. although the Stipa tenuissima proved to be the wrong plant in the wrong place, I haven't given up on the idea of using grasses in the Paradise Garden. And I've got the perfect one. And that is pheasant grass. Now, for many years that was known as another Stipa, Stipa arundinacea. It's actually now changed its name and it's known as Anamanthele lessoniana. But pheasant grass is the name that we all know it by. And the great thing about it is that not only does it have that same spray of foliage, but it's much more adaptable to our conditions and weather. It grows here easily. I've grown it for years and years. It's short-lived. It dies back after about 3 or 4 years, but it seeds itself very freely, which means that I can dig up the seedlings, transfer them to the Paradise Garden and know that they will establish very quickly. So I'm not going to take the biggest plant. You want to get them when they're relatively small because they will take moving much better. Just dig it up with good roots on it, and you can see there it's got a decent root system. And I've got about another half dozen or so I can get here from the grass borders and probably end up with about 20 plants that I can move into the Paradise Garden. Right, well that's my job for a little while. Here are your jobs for this weekend. As the soil is warming up, it's a good idea to sow your first batch of peas now. Prepare the soil and then draw a wide drill, about 6 inches wide and 2 inches deep. Sow the peas 2 inches apart in 2 parallel rows. Cover them over, label them, and then as the shoots appear, you can place in some support. Bedding plants of all kinds are starting to appear in garden centres and nurseries. And if you buy them now as plugs, particularly tender plants that are not ready to put out yet, but pot them on and then grow them with a little bit of protection, you can plant them out after the last frost as much larger, healthier plants that will both save you money and give you a head start. Gladioli make spectacular border plants, but they're also superb as cut flowers. Run a deep drill and line the bottom with some horticultural grit to ensure good drainage. Place the corms about 9 inches to a foot apart and then cover them over with plenty of soil. And then they will appear in a row and can be harvested as a crop for the house. I'm planting far fewer of the pheasant grass, partly because it's bigger, and also I learnt from the Stipa that the effect I want, which is a soft foliar backdrop to the flowers, doesn't need too many plants. Right, that can just go in there like that. Well, that's it for this week. I hope you have a cool, calm weekend ahead of you. And I'll see you back here at Longmeadow next Friday at 9 o'clock. So until then, bye-bye.